This is an interview with Francis Ebert on Thursday, February 21st, 2008. The interviewer is Nancy Sherman.
Okay,
All
so
right.
your father,
Well,
where did he go to school to become an attorney?
he studied in the law office.
Oh, interesting.
You could, I don't know, I'm not sure you can still do that, but he did.
Don't know.
I don't know either. Anyhow, he was an attorney. His sister married the doctor who came to Marysville and Yuba City in the 1890s, I guess. He was a doctor, and he attended, I guess it was my grandmother's fatal illness, ultimate illness, and he put it together to marry this daughter. And he was several years older. He was about 20 years older.
Well, how big was Yuba City and Marysville in those days, do you think?
Oh, God.
Must have been all ranching. And Chinese, too.
Oh, lots of Chinese.
Yeah.
Well, of course, Marysville was Marysville at one time, I think it was the third largest city in California.
Really? I didn't know that.
I'm not sure of that, but I
possible.
think that's right. And it was one of the gateways to the gold fields. I'm sorry, that's
fine.
and it's not accurate.
No, that's fine.
And so anyhow,
The Goldfields?
well, that was Marysville, and it was the big city.
Ah.
Even when I was a kid, Marysville
Well,
was
it's close to Sacramento.
yeah.
Yeah.
But and of the two towns,
It was bigger?
oh, much bigger. And
My
now Yuba City is much
goodness.
larger.
My
Yeah.
goodness, yeah.
And so then my father married, and they were expecting me. And this is in 1922.
Yeah.
And my mother died at my birth.
Oh.
And she
Were
was...
you the first child then?
I was the only.
You were the... Yeah, okay.
And so she was, I think, around 45, and I wasn't planned, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And so what happened was my birth mother was very concerned about her ability to survive, and didn't. But she prevailed upon my aunt, my brother's sister, to the doctor's wife, who was also involved in my birth. But,
Yes.
and the long story is, the doctor and his wife took me into their family and raised me. And I knew them as my mother and father.
But you kept the other name.
I kept my original name. I was never adopted.
I see.
I called them Mom and Dad and that sort of thing. And he lived on until just after I graduated from Yuba City High School in 1940. And he died in September of that year. And my mother, as I call her, lived into the 60s, and she died when I was here in Lafayette. And they lived in Yuba City on 2nd Street.
Your natural father, after your mother died, what happened to him?
Well, he was an attorney, and
did you see him very much?
frequently on Sundays.
Yeah.
We never lived together. In later life, and after the doctor died, later on he did move in. We lived on, Yuba City, of course.
A bit, yes. I don't remember it that well anymore, but go ahead, yes.
Okay, you know where the courthouse
Yes,
is?
yes,
That's 2nd Street.
yes.
And our house was down on the other side on 2nd Street, up against the levee.
Up against the levee, yes.
Yeah, there's a whole string of houses
Yes.
along in there.
Yes.
And that's where I grew up.
It was interesting for us to go back for that visit because my daughter and granddaughter were with me, and so we stopped by the house where we used to live and the preschool
Yeah.
where she went as a young child, and that was very exciting to her.
What years were you in Yuba City?
Oh my goodness, that would have been she's no, I mean that's 35 years ago. So what is that?
70s, 60s?
Yeah, the late 60s. Yeah. Or mid 60s.
Yeah.
Because we came to San Jose.
Okay, well, that's when I was here.
Now,
Well,
libraries when you were growing up.
the one I remember particularly was on 2nd Street at the in Yuba City, and right at the corner of 2nd and I think it's Plymouth Street.
Yeah.
No, that's way uptown. I don't remember the street. But it was at the beginning of the business district as it went on the west side of 2nd Street, because the east side had very little. I don't remember. It was, of course, it was up against the levee. And
Yeah.
so then in that area was the Yuba City, which I guess was a part of the Sutter County library system, a library.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember visiting it, but not with any frequency. We had all the reading material we had needed at home and so forth. And I started first grade. They didn't think I should go to kindergarten. I started first grade in about 1929 or something like that, and went through the first grade, the second grade, and then my mother decided I should skip a grade. My birthday's in December, so I was kind of in between where everybody was. So I was the oldest in the first class and the youngest in the next. But I stayed in that class and finished the Yuba City schools.
In those days, were there libraries in the schools?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And as I recall, there were.
Okay.
And I thought we had a pretty good school system. My first and second grades, I guess it started with double sessions. This was the Bridge Street. Then it was Yuba City School, but Bridge and Plymouth, still there, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
And so I went through all 8 grades there, except I skipped the 3rd grade, and then graduated from 8th grade in 86, 36, and then went to high school in Yuba City for 4 years. And then 1 year to junior college, Yuba JC. And it was originally started as a part of the Marysville High School, and it was contained in the Marysville High School used to be in downtown, in the center of Marysville. And I can't remember exactly where, but they built a new high school, the big brick building, and it's still there, I guess. And they started the junior college at the same time, and it was part of it. But then later on, they moved the junior college across the street, south of the high school building, and that's where I went to junior college for 1 year. Now I understand it's out by Camp Beale or something.
Could be. I don't know.
Yuba JC. I went 1 year, and then I decided I wanted to major in music because I thought I could sing. And San Jose State appealed to me. And I went to San Jose State. Did you go there?
No. Grew up in Wisconsin, so my degree is from my first degree is from there.
Yeah. Well, you went, but you were in San Jose for a while, though, right?
We lived in San Jose for a while. Yeah, we did. When we first came to California.
Well, then.
Well, let me ask you, I've got some questions here. Was reading important to you when you were growing up?
Well, sure. Sure.
Yeah, and you had books at home. What were they like?
They had libraries.
Yeah, my
one
father
room
was an attorney. He was into
one
books.
one room. Well, the doctor was the one that was the reader.
The doctor.
And he was a self-taught man. Well, not really. He went to Northwestern Medical School and all that stuff. He was originally born in Scotland. And wound up in Marysville. He moved from Rockford, Illinois, and after he became a doctor, and he moved out to Oregon. And while he was in Oregon, he had something to do with a guy who he diagnosed as down with leprosy. And I don't really remember what he did, but he received considerable notoriety
For that.
for that.
Uh-huh.
And it was in papers all around. And did you ever know the Skinner family? No, I don't think they were. Well, there was Randolph Skinner was a rancher on Live Oak Highway in Yuba City, and he read about this Dr. Barr and the leprosy thing, and he contacted him and said, "Were you the same Dr. Barr I knew in Rockford, Illinois?" And it turned out he was.
Oh my goodness!
And he was instrumental in getting Dr. Barr to the Marysville community. And so that's where that started. And
one of the questions here is, what awareness of community did you have while growing up? And it seems like you had a lot.
oh yeah, well, when I was a kid, Marysville had, I don't know, 7,000-8,000 people, probably, maybe more. Yuba City had 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000, and it was a stepchild of the community.
Yeah.
And we had a fierce football rivalry and basketball rivalry and so forth. And so I really enjoyed my childhood there.
Well, and your education came to the college experience at San Jose State.
I went to San Jose State as a sophomore and did 2 years, and the Navy caught up with me. And they worked it out, so I finished my college education in Missouri. And off to Columbia, and midshipman school, and commissioned. And then the war. And then I mentioned that our ship was sent back for an overhaul in February of '45. And here we were, for God's sakes, for 3 months in a heavy part of the war, and I'm practically in my hometown, being in Oakland, and that's when Marge and I decided to get married.
And she was teaching?
By that time, she was teaching in Sonora.
Okay.
At that time, and she taught 2 years. She was still teaching in her first year when we got married, which was April of '45, and then the ship went back and got into action, but we were doing we were supplying the fleet for Admiral Halsey.
Oh, okay.
We were a supply ship, and the bomb dropped.
Yeah.
And I got home in like January or February, I guess it was, of '45. I'm married, and what was I going to do? I decided I wanted to become a teacher, so I applied to graduate to Stanford for graduate school, and was accepted, and entered a Master of Arts program and teaching credential program, and I went 6 quarters in a row to Stanford, which was April of '46. Until roughly August of '47. And by that time I had my master's degree and my secondary teaching credential and a wife.
Yeah.
And she was, what really happened, after she finished her second year at Sonora, she lucked out and got a job teaching in Palo Alto High School.
Oh my.
How could you beat it? So she was teaching in Fort Bragg. I mean, in Palo Alto High, right across from the Stanford Stadium, and I was going to Stanford, and we finished it all up in August of '47, and we went to Fort Bragg as teachers. And the reason we went to Fort Bragg is they offered both of us work. She was a business ed teacher, and I was going to teach history. And
So you could go together.
we taught in Fort Bragg. We were married, and she taught 1 year. And that summer, she started feeling queer, and of course she was pregnant.
Yeah.
And in those days, pregnant teachers
Didn't teach.
Mm-hmm. And so she quit teaching. And I finished 3 years at Fort Bragg High School, went back in the summers. Our son was born in March of '49, and then I was looking for, I'd gone back summers and got an administrative credential, and started looking for a principalship, and got one in a little community called Redwood Valley.
Where is that?
You're familiar with Fort Bragg?
Well,
I mean,
a
you
little
know
bit.
where it is.
I know where it is. I've been there.
You know Ukiah.
I don't know Ukiah. I know Fort Bragg.
Okay, well, Ukiah, there's a little community. Ukiah is the county seat of Mendocino County, just over the hill from Fort Bragg. And north of Ukiah, before you get to Willits, about halfway between Ukiah and Willits, is a little community called Redwood Valley.
Oh, okay.
And it achieved fame during the Jim Jones thing because so many of those people from the People's Temple, was that what it's called?
Yeah.
They were from Redwood Valley.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Well,
Okay.
I didn't know about it when they were there. I don't think they were there when I was there.
Right.
Anyhow, we went up there. I took over this principalship in this school and was there 7 years.
So that was your first job as principal.
Yeah, and I was, but it was also its own district, so I was superintendent
As
and
well.
principal. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then after another year or so up there, our daughter came along. And shortly after our daughter came along, my wife's father passed away up in Nevada. And a year or so after that, her mother sold out in Nevada and moved down to Redwood Valley and moved in with us. She lived with us for 36 years.
Wow. So did she come with you to Lafayette then when you came?
Yes.
Was that your next stop, Lafayette, from Redwood Valley?
No. From Redwood Valley, after 7 years, I decided to go back and get my doctorate.
I see.
Which I did. And that took a couple of years off. And so after 2 years, I was able to land a job as business manager of the Los Altos School District. You're familiar with Los Altos?
I certainly am, yes.
And I was there for 3 years. And during that 3 years, I kept looking for a superintendency and ultimately landed the one in Lafayette and came here in '62 as superintendent.
Okay, and for how long was that again? For how many years?
In Lafayette?
In Lafayette?
10.
10 years, yeah.
And I noticed in the thing I was reading about, there was the new library opened in '62?
The old library.
I often wondered whether the school district provided the land, or it was right next, it's adjacent to Lafayette School.
I don't know.
I don't know either. I didn't know it was new. I knew they had it, and that's the only library in Lafayette I was ever in. And I don't know that I ever took anything out in the way of books, but one of the things that I found out that they had was they had a record collection. I don't know if they still have it or not, but they had a record collection, and I was deeply interested in records and classical music, and I got involved in recording, taping, and so I took a lot of records out from there. And I think when I finished, I think I even donated some records.
Now,
I'm not sure.
music was perhaps an avocation of yours? You considered majoring in music at one point,
Yeah,
right?
I went to San Jose State to become a music
Uh-huh.
teacher, and after a few quarters, I decided that wasn't for me.
I did something similar and ended up as a French major.
Okay, well, I wound up as a history major,
Yeah.
and that was because of I got into a fraternity at San Jose State, and this was back when all the fraternities and sororities at San Jose State were locals. There were no national fraternities. And my wife belonged to one, or my future wife belonged to one, and that's where we met. And so living in our fraternity house was one of the history department's professors. He lived in the house. He was a bachelor. I've often wondered whether he was gay. Who cares now? Anyhow, we became very good friends, and convinced me that I should change my major to history, which I did. And when I graduated from San Jose State, I had a degree without a major, not specified. So when I went to Stanford, I had to make up all the history, their bachelor history requirements and so forth, which I did, and that worked out fine. So that was the end of that.
There's a question here pertaining to your years of living in Lafayette. Defining the goals of a community as a place of mutual support, shared values, and acceptance of difference. How do you see Lafayette meeting these goals? Now, you haven't lived in Lafayette for some time.
I haven't lived there for 20 years.
20 years. When you were there, how would you reply to that? A place of mutual support, shared values, and acceptance.
Well, I always thought the schools I thought in the first place they were darn good. And I hoped I helped keep that reputation. The one time that we went to the community for a tax increase, we lost. And I don't even know how they financed it ever since. I left and that was it. I didn't have any more to do with it.
Well, we pass some and we say no to others, but we're limping along. What are well, you already told me about your earliest memories of the Lafayette Library, and you're taking out records and being involved in that way. Can you say how you feel a library in general serves a community?
Oh,
Do you have a thought on that?
Very strong thought. I think it's a fine place. I mean, it's an essential part of the community. Absolutely, no question. And I had all the school libraries that I needed for any of that sort of help. And of course, my office was right next to Stanley School. The Stanley, at one point, when I came to Lafayette, they were finishing under construction and opened during, I think it was right after Christmas of my first year here, and that would be 62, 63, December to January. And that was what they ultimately called the W.B. Ellis School. You remember that one?
Right, yes.
Up behind Ocalanis.
Yes.
And so we opened that. That was the last school, and we thought it was going to grow. There's a piece of property, you know where Pleasant Hill Road ends in Lafayette on Olympic Boulevard? And it goes into a gated community now.
Yes, it does.
That piece of property was in negotiations to be purchased by the school district with state money in 1962, and ultimately it went through, and in the fall of 62, we owned that piece of property, which it never was developed as a school, and ultimately it was after I left that they sold it and it became subdivided into homes. And so we didn't do much building during my time in Lafayette, but some. And we built a new library in Lafayette, almost adjacent to what is the district office. I don't know what's happened to it. I'm sure it's all changed and so forth.
You mean
now.
at Stanley?
Yeah, at Stanley. And so we built a new library, and I was kind of proud of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the community, proud of it too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Do you remember how the money was raised for that? Do you have any idea, recollection of?
Well, one of the when I came to the district and was being interviewed, some of the board members were very much interested in instructional television. And they wanted to know what I thought about it. And the way they asked me, I deduced that I better like it.
Oh, uh-huh.
And so, after a while, the president of the school board at that time was a gentleman called Boardman Moore, worked for Chevron Research. And he was the chairman of the board and a Stanford graduate, and very much a part of my coming here. I know he supported me. There was another Stanford graduate in the board at the same time. It was a hell of a school board. And I decided I better get interested in instructional television.
Yeah.
And we did. And
did the library support that? Did they provide?
Not that I know of. I don't know. I don't remember using the Lafayette Library in any way other than that music experience I had. And we worked with consultants and so forth and developed this program. We actually set up a total in-school television system in Lafayette. And you know where the district maintenance buildings are.
Mm-hmm.
One of those, we added on to what was there, the shop for the custodians and maintenance people, and we built a television studio and equipped it and so forth. And what do we use for money? There was a bond issue that had been passed but hadn't been sold, and we raised the money from a previous election. I don't know when it was.
Okay.
And we did all this television stuff.
Well, you know, I started teaching back in Wisconsin in the early 60s, and I do recall instructional television. I was asked to use it in my French teaching, but the state of the art was California. We learned from California.
Well,
in that regard.
we had it, and we had a program. We had a central studio, and we taped lessons out to all the schools.
The schools, yeah.
In Spanish.
Yeah.
That was what we used primarily. Yeah. I think it's totally gone now.
Yeah, I think so.
But that's how we financed it.
Yeah, okay.
And we financed the library the same way. We had some of that money left over.
It says here, did you have any anxious or funny moments through all of this experience and getting established as superintendent?
No, I'm not sure funny. But we had 2 or 3 crucial situations. After I'd been here a year, the fellow who was assistant superintendent, my predecessor was a guy by the name of Bill Ellis. That's who W.B. Ellis was named after. Yes. Wonderful guy, wonderful, nice gentleman. And I'm trying to remember what my train of thought was.
Well, if you had any anxious moments.
Oh, yeah, okay. The guy who was my assistant superintendent and had been an assistant superintendent under Bill Ellis, and was a disappointed office seeker.
Oh.
When I first met him, he had all this array of stuff on his desk. We met for a day, and he said, "Oh, this is all that stuff I've done here," and so forth. And I could tell he was crying. He didn't get the job.
Yeah.
And I had to put him straight. Hey, I had nothing to do with it. And, you know,
not easy.
It's over the hill, and I want us to work together and so forth. Well, anyhow, he had ambitions and went on. He finished 1 year with me, went on elsewhere, and I hired another guy, and he brought in a curriculum consultant. The guy I hired came from Claremont Graduate School, PhD, and wonderful guy. He was with me 3 or 4 years, and then he wound up in Mill Valley. I don't know what's ever happened to him. But anyhow, he and his consultant he brought in, this was the time when the National Defense Education Act came into being, and schools got money. And we got some, and what were we going to do with it? And this assistant superintendent and the consultant dreamed up a program because there was interest in the school district in outdoor education. And they developed a program that we call the La Coya Project, and that was because that was the name of a campground over in, where was it, Napa County. So it was a school for the blind. Well, anyhow, it was a place that we could have outdoor education, and we could take our kids, 6th grade kids, over there.
I see.
And then what we did, because of this, we wanted to bring in an equal number of kids from the Richmond School District, black kids. So you get the idea of why this was happening in this fashion. And the community went, phew. Most people supported us magnificently. The board was supportive. But we had a core of people who weren't supportive, and they raised a lot of hell.
Oh.
And I can remember a big meeting in Stanley School we had one night when arguments went back and forth. But the school board was solidly for it, and so forth. So the program went on. We did it for a couple of years.
Now, did any of that money go toward improving library resources, either at the school or in the community?
Well, no, it was all in this
Had to do
outdoor
with
education.
outdoor experience.
Yeah.
Moving to the present day and the new library. I don't know how much you know about the new library proposed and
Only
going
that
up.
I used to meet there in Rotary meetings for years and years and years.
As a
The old
veteran.
building, sure. No, not really.
Yeah. Is the idea of a new library with this expanded projection of the consortium and all of that, is that attractive to you? Do you think that's important?
Very much so. I think that's great.
Yeah.
Is Lafayette going through Walnut Creek going through a new library program too?
Well, they have been attempting to. I don't know where it stands at this point.
Yeah, well, they have to get rid of the old one because it's
they've had trouble with financing.
It's in the way of something. Yeah.
We've been very fortunate to have good community support and money coming. If there's anything here, you haven't been involved really because you've been out of Lafayette, so you haven't been involved with this new library project.
No, not at all. I haven't been involved with the community. The thing I'm most involved with in the community is the Masonic Lodge.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you still?
Well, I don't go anymore. You know where the lodge is?
Yes.
It used to be a church.
Yes.
I became a Mason when we were in Fort Bragg, and then as we moved, I changed Masonic affiliation, and so I came here and found out Bill Ellis was a Mason.
Oh, really?
And so I affiliated right away, and I didn't do anything except just go to lodge. I was active in that respect. But then when I started at Los Altos, and then before getting, after leaving, during the time I was here, I wasn't terribly active in the lodge. I belonged, but that was it. After retirement, in 1980, when I retired, one of the things the lodge did, I don't know if they still do it or not, but they would arrange to go to another lodge somewhere and put on a degree and have an overnight and all that sort of thing. And I got wind of a visitation they were going to make at Columbia.
Your old school.
Marge's old school in Sonora. And so we went, and I saw a lot of people that I hadn't seen in a long time, met some new ones, and said, "Hey, now that I've retired, I should be getting active." And the guy that was the incoming master of the lodge called me up after I got home and said, "How about joining the line?"
Oh, that's nice.
And I did.
Oh, that's nice.
And so I was master of this lodge in 1986.
Uh-huh.
And 4 or 5 years after that, I became secretary. And the Masons used to be very big with Public Schools Week. Did you know that?
I wasn't aware.
Well, they sponsored it here in California.
Oh, they did.
And I was statewide chairman
Okay.
of the Grand Lodge Public Schools Committee for a number of years. And so then why did I bring the lodge up?
Well, it was just something that you picked up on doing after.
Well, yeah, I got
After,
active, and as I say, I
retirement.
became a master of the lodge and so forth, and that's all I've done since.
Yeah.
And then since moving from Lafayette here into Rossmoor, they have a crab feed every year, and I went to that a month ago or 2 months.
Yeah, that's a fun thing.
Yeah.
This time of year. Having been away from Lafayette now for some time, I don't know if you can answer this, but do you have an opinion as to perhaps why the citizens of Lafayette have responded so enthusiastically to the new library project?
Well, the community of Lafayette is. I'm interested in the current election situation and nominations for president and all that. And they're now talking about how certain blocks of people are for Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
And it turns out the well-educated are certainly for Obama, more so than Clinton.
That's been said, yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. I took an interest in that happening. That's the kind of community Lafayette is. It's a well-educated community. They think highly of their schools.
They do, yes.
And I don't really know why our project didn't win. We had a committee of outstanding people who were pushing it and made studies as to what we needed for money and what we were going to do with it and all this sort of thing. And yet this was in the, this would be in the late 60s. And I guess it just wasn't a good time, and it went down to defeat.
Is there an outcome that you could see, hopefully, for the new library?
Well, I can't imagine this community, knowing what kind of people are in it and what their educational aspirations and accomplishments are, that it wouldn't be very supportive of a library. I just can't imagine that.
This is an interesting question, I think. It was said the internet would kill the printed word and libraries would become obsolete. How will our new library avoid such a fate?
Well, I think as part of the internet, I would imagine you'd have a connection and you'd be terribly involved in it.
There are at least 30 computers. I don't know if my number's correct, but I'm sure there are at least 30 computers planned, for a space in the library.
Sure. Sure.
And of course, that's part and parcel of how we research these days.
Yeah. I've often thought of Lafayette as being a very high-class community, and one of which I was proud to be a member and a part of. And I mentioned my son.
Yeah.
And he got into Berkeley, which was terrible as far as Stanford.
Yes.
But anyhow,
big rivals there.
He's a big Berkeley fan. He got into Berkeley, finished, and the first job he had was working in a restaurant, and ultimately to a couple other restaurants. He ultimately managed a Union Hotel in Benicia, and he was working in oh God, what was the chain he was in?
But he was in hospitality, sounds like.
Yeah, but he was running restaurants. I've even lost the restaurants are gone now.
Oh.
Anyhow.
Does he live in Lafayette? No.
Well, he was working in Petaluma, and he was managing. What's the name of that chain? You know the restaurant. You know where Concord Avenue turns and crosses the freeway and becomes Chilpancingo?
Yeah.
And up a little farther was a restaurant.
I don't remember.
It was
the
a
restaurant.
chain. Well, anyhow,
I
he
can't
was
remember it either,
working
but I
for
can
that
picture the
chain.
restaurant.
He was
Yeah.
working for that chain
Mhm.
as in their management program. They ultimately sent him down to run their store in Torrance, and then they brought him back to run the one in San Rafael up on the hill.
So he moves around.
And moved around. When he was in San Rafael is when he moved to Petaluma, and he started working. He decided that golden turtle, is that something turtle?
Velvet turtle?
Velvet turtle. That's it. That's
it.
it. That's the chain. He decided that he wasn't part of their program, and so he quit, and he wound up working for Embassy Suites in Napa. And he was in there. He was their food manager, and he was working there, and he got canned. And he's been trying to go back to school to get an MBA. He'd been accepted to USF, and when he got canned in Embassy Suites, the only advice I gave him, whether I had anything to do with his decision, he did exactly what I thought he should do. I said, go get yourself a waiting job in some restaurant over in that neighborhood and just work for tips and go back to school and get your MBA. It's exactly what he did. He took him a year or so at USF, and he graduated there in 88, 87, I guess. And he got hired at Mudd's
And now he owns
to manage it.
Yeah.
And so after 3 or 4 years, yeah, he bought. But what happened after he got the job at Mudd's, he came to his mother and me and said, you tried to sell your house 3 or 4 years ago. How about selling it to me?
Oh.
And so that's what happened.
So he lives in Lafayette.
He lives in Lafayette in a house that's...
Well, he will be able to enjoy the new library then. And I have one final question. Do you think the library has a way of enhancing the sense of community in Lafayette?
Well, of course. Because it's where people meet. It's where they take on all kinds of projects.
Yeah.
I'm sure the Internet's a big part of all of that.
And there will even be a coffee shop.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Yeah, he's really been involved. And he's had Mudd's for almost 20. He hasn't owned it 20 years, but he's owned it most of that. Yeah. And
that's a lovely place.
I need to tell you about my daughter.
We're going to run out of tape in a minute, so
Okay,
let me
well,
just ask you
that's
before
not
then.
okay.
Have I left anything out? Do you have any final thoughts about